Hello everyone at home, this is Adelaide Eternal and our monthly vintage tournament. So we run the other two formats as well, Highlander and Legacy, and just rotate between the three. So you're with Sarven McLinton in the booth, and next to me I have Beckett Wolfe.
G'day guys.
So in this matchup today, on the left we have Chad Taylor, who is on a blue-white Monastery Mentor deck. And on the right we have Brendan Dobson, who's on a 4-colour fish type deck revolving around a Leovold Emissary of Trest. So whilst they're still shuffling up and resolving mulligans, let's have a look at their deck lists. So first up we have Chad Taylor's deck list. This is a Monastery Mentor deck, and it's obviously revolving around the interaction between Monastery Mentor and Gush. So trying to use free spells like Gush to instantly generate advantage. You can also use a Gataxian Probe the moment after you play a Monastery Mentor for free, paying 2 life, drawing a card and also making a 1/1 Prowess token, and using the Mentor to just run away with the game. That's why he has 4 of them in the deck.
It's a pretty stock standard list, Sarv. You obviously want the 4 Mentor in the list and all the classic blue spells like Cruise and Time Walk and A-Call. The Gush is a real standout. You know, it can give you some really explosive starts. And someone asked me why is Gush running this deck, and you know it can actually generate you mana sometimes when you've got 2 lands out and you've missed your land drop. You just go Gush them back, draw 2 pieces of gas like a Sensei's Divining Top and a Mox. Then you get to play that land you had anyway. You've still got 2 floating, play the Mox, and suddenly you've got 2 Mentor triggers, a bunch of mana, and some extra cards in hand. It's really powerful in this list. And
yeah, it's very strong. It's really nice to see Gush unrestricted. It was restricted 5 years back or so, and you can see it's a mainstay of the format now. So this particular Monastery Mentor build is one that is very consistent because it's running the 4 Preordains. It's got the 4 Gataxian Probes to make sure you trigger your Mentor making a token immediately, and the 4 Gushes to do exactly the same thing. And a whole bunch of 4-ofs, 4 Mental Misstep as well. This is the type of Mentor deck you will bring to a control fight. You would not bring this type of Mentor deck to a meta that's filled with Eldrazi White, Hate Bears, Mud decks based on Ravager and the like. The fact that you have so many cards that get hurt by Thorn of Amethyst, taxing you for 1 extra mana, makes it a lot weaker to those types of decks. So that's why he's got his 4 Swords to Plowshares in there to make sure he handles that. But the 2 Snapcaster Mage in there is definitely something you like to use to fight control battles. But Snapcaster Mage against a Thorn of Amethyst or against a Sphere of Resistance is horrible.
Yeah, it makes you cast 2 spells, and there's other ways to get the value out of those Swords to Plowshares, and there's other ways to deal with the Eldrazi Plague which has plagued pretty much every format. So you run a similar list to this, Sarv, and
I do.
Do you run the Snapcaster Mages?
No, so in their place I'm running Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which is a 0/2 legendary creature that you can tap to loot, and if your graveyard has 5 cards in it, you get to flip it around and use his other abilities, one of which involves reducing the power on opponent's creatures, perfect against those 2/1 Phyrexian Revokers.
Yeah, there's a lot of Hate Bears out now, aren't there?
And then the other alternative is going down on that Planeswalker and flashing back Swords to Plowshares. So it's very hard for the opponents to beat Swords to Plowshares, untap, flip Jace around, and Swords to Plowshares them again. But in this version, he can do the same thing using Snapcaster Mage. The issue is it's a lot better against the control decks that don't run the Thorns, and it's a lot worse against the Thorn decks. But on the other hand, he's really gunning for the opposing mana-heavy decks like Paradoxical Storm, which uses a whole bunch of mana rocks, and also being on the play against an Eldrazi player that's relying on his Mana Crypt or something like that, because Chad's running a Singleton Stony Silence in the main and 2 more Stony Silence in the side. So he's only relying on 3 artifact mana, and he wants to probably use one of those artifact mana to cast the Stony Silence on turn 1.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I get why you're on Stony Silence, but those Moxes are so good in with a Mentor deck, and you know, I've played Vintage running off-color Moxes, so you know, if I'm running blue and white, that means running the Moxes that aren't in those colors, just essentially tapping for colors, and often it's still correct. In this list, he's not running any off-color Moxes, and they're particularly good with the Mentor. I would have thought you'd want to run off-color Moxes, even if just to trigger that Mentor or to cast Sensei's Divining Top, which is another one which lets you get a bunch of Mentor triggers. You know, you can just activate that top, put it on top, draw a card, cast it again, and you keep triggering that Mentor. And, you know, he's not even running it. So it's an
because
interesting choice.
It's recent tech. This is the flavor of the month. The Atog Lord is famous currently in the last couple of weeks for running this Stony Silence in the main deck and Stony Silence in the side, mainly because he was expecting metas to be dominated by Paradoxical Storm, and also it shuts off those Eldrazi's mana rocks so that they can't get the Thought-Knot Seer out in turn 1. So it's currently the flavour of the month, but this could easily change. It's very meta dependent.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Definitely. He's up against Brendan Dobson's 4-colour Fish deck. So you'll see Fish bandied around a lot. In the past, Fish used to be Murphberg, but at the end of the day, Fish is an ideal. Fish is a philosophy. Fish is all about
Leovold right now,
right? And disrupting your opponent and keeping them off, and also being able to play blue to draw cards and do other crazy stuff like Force of Will and the like. So
let's be honest, Sarv. It's all about getting to run Leovold. What a spicy card! It looks like so much fun. The minute I saw it, and I reckon everyone else saw it, they wanted to try it out in a deck, and being able to run it in Vintage.
It's being tried all over the shop. Lots of people are trying to have a go at Leovold, and the general consensus is if you want to play Leovold, you need to play Deathrite Shaman. It's all about going turn 1 mana acceleration, turn 2 your 3 different color 3/3 that draws you cards when they try and remove him or other creatures or Thoughtseize you. It's really, really about getting him down on turn 2 off some kind of acceleration.
That's right, and a lot of the acceleration in Vintage is colors. As I was saying, there's those off-color Moxes, and you've got Mana Vault, Soul Ring. He costs blue, black, green, so you can't actually ramp him out that easily. As Sarv says, that's why you might want the Deathrite Shaman. And Deathrite Shaman isn't, he's really, really strong in Legacy. He's not as strong in Vintage, but I think it's actually really good in this list. You know, he's still a great card. He's great against the Dredge decks and a lot of reanimation sort of spells, and there's a lot of good uses of Graveyard. And I think it's actually it's actually a viable option here to go that turn 1 Shaman, hit the color. You know, you also get to cast Click, which costs blue, and Meddling Mage, which costs blue-white. So I think you need the Shaman in there for sure.
Yeah, he's even got Leovold 5/8, which is his Spirit of the Labyrinth. So that's all about not letting players draw additional cards at the turn. So it's kind of another disruptive piece. It's another thing that's winning this card advantage war, either stopping your opponent from drawing cards with Spirit or drawing cards yourself with Leovold. He's also got this a little interaction between Spirit of the Labyrinth and Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and that land allows both players to draw a card and discard a card. But obviously, with Spirit of the Labyrinth out, his opponent isn't going to get to draw any additional cards.
The cool thing about that is at instant speed as well. So you'll find, a lot of the discard spells that Wizards produce are sorcery speed, because discarding at instant speed means you get to do it in their draw step, and it's actually a legitimate lock. If you have that Spirit out and they're out of cards, which can often happen after a Force of Will counter battle, and then you can start activating that Sanitarium, then they just draw the card and they instantly have to discard it before they get to play it. And it's a soft lock, and I think it's legitimate. It might be a bit slow. I've not seen it in use, but for now it's definitely interesting. At least I'd like to see how it goes.
Yeah, I think we'll go down to the match and let's see if any of these cool little interactions do turn up on screen. I hope so. There's a lot of spice in Brendan's list, and one of those cards that he's running main deck is Ceremonious Rejection.
Oh, we had to look that one up. At least I had to look that one up. I hadn't seen it before.
It's one of these new cards. New cards take a while for the vintage community like us to catch on to.
The old crusty vintage players.
That's right. You usually just ignore all of the ignore all the new cards and wait for someone to break something.
Myself, I don't even look at the new sets. Everyone's always asking me, "Oh, have you seen this new set? No, that's going to be great in Modern, or how good's that going to be in Standard?"
I can't imagine if I get to draft that 3/3 Hill Giant type effect. Unfortunately, we're not all about that right now. We're all about broken mana and ridiculously powerful spells.
That's it. And I find I always just like to wait and let it settle in. People always brew, and that's great. But I like to just wait, see how it settles in, see how relevant that card's going to be, and yeah, Brendan trying out a few different ones today. So
we're off to the races here.
Looks like we're all
with
keeping.
Chad. Chad's on the left. They both have the same playmat, demonstrating that both of them are players of a high skill level, having won the game days. Or perhaps they really like Liliana, I'm not sure. Well, maybe you can have both. So Chad starts off with the fetch into a Tundra and casting a Preordain. So there's 4 of these in his deck. You're going to see a lot of Preordains in these kind of matches. Right now, it's okay because he doesn't have an opponent that's taxing him. But in reality, little does he know, his opponent is going to be hating on those draws. He's going to be hating on things through Spirit of the Labyrinth and the like. And we've also got Vendilion Clicks in the draw phase, just like Modern.
One thing, just looking at Brendan's list, is no Mental Misstep. Now, I don't really like Mental Misstepping my opponent's turn 1 Preordain unless they've mulled heavily or I know that they're digging for something specific. But
I think Mental Misstep, if it was in his list, is mainly there to counter the opponent's Swords to Plowshares on your creatures.
That's right, and there's plenty of good 1-drops like Acol, of course, and I thought most lists were running at least a couple of Mental Missteps in the main board.
This is true. So Brendan does have a little bit of a slow start. He doesn't have the Deathrite Shaman. He doesn't have some broken mana to get a 2-drop out on turn 1. So this might be a little bit hard for the fish deck. The fish deck really wants to be getting something out turn 1, some kind of disruptive little aggressive creature, like a Meddling Mage on turn 1, turning off the opponent's ability to do something.
Something you don't see all too often. Old school lists run them, but you hear he's got Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, and Imperial Seal. Brendan has in his list, and Imperial Seal has been a lot less popular since Eldrazi came out because of the taxes and because it drains the life even, and it's just a little bit slow. But yeah, he definitely wants that versatility in his deck. He wants to be able to hit those cards, which is interesting for a creature-heavy deck. So.
Interesting decision that Brendan's making now on another topic is he has a Meddling Mage in hand and he has the mana to cast it, but he's deciding whether or not he wants to play the Meddling Mage or what he's going to name with a Meddling Mage because he might want to hold mana open for something. I think his fear is, what if my opponent plays Monastery Mentor on turn 3 and then Gushes and then Gitaxian Probes? If I don't keep my Swords of Plowshares up, my opponent will run away with the game because Brendan doesn't have the ability to get back in the game if his opponent makes 1 or 2 Monastery Mentor tokens.
I'd agree with that, yeah. And he can always name Monastery Mentor, but a Swords to Plowshares at end of turn pretty much wraps that up, doesn't it? I think Swords to Plowshares is going to be quite good against Brendan's list.
And vice
as we
versa.
said, it's in there for the Eldrazi matchup mainly, but it's relevant. There's a lot of these sort of hate creatures since that are challenging the blue decks, which have just been the titans of the format for so long. And white was always the worst color in Vintage, and now you're seeing it played everywhere with Mentor, with Dahlia, and now with Eldrazi White as well.
I definitely remember the days of deciding should I or shouldn't I buy Mox Pearl. It's the 5th Mox. It's a big investment, but I'm never going to play it. It's the worst color. And I'm pretty glad I bought that one a while ago. It's now probably the 2nd best Mox in the format, next to Mox Sapphire.
Yeah, look, well, I wouldn't know what the worst one is now. I reckon probably Emerald.
Green,
because Ruby still got Dak Fade, and that was another sort of recent-ish addition to Vintage, which took Vintage by storm.
Mm-hmm.
And Dak's been really good, stealing an artifact and just looting through the deck and presenting a threat to control.
Yeah, really nice.
Wasteland's another one.
Wasteland. I mean, Chad's
Vintage is new
sending the
these
Wasteland out on the blue source of his opponent. So he's playing the mana denial strategy here. He is on the play, so he's hoping his opponent doesn't have extra land. But thankfully, Brendan did actually end up keeping a hand with multiple. He's had something like 3 or 4 land in his opening hand, and a Vendilion Click and some other higher end creatures. So it's not really going to go the way that Chad was planning there. But who knows? He might also have a large number of land himself and wants to land his Monastery Mentor.
Chad could have dropped the Mentor that turn instead of wasting. I can't really see his hand, but I think he really wants to resolve that. Make sure he's got Force of Will back up and make sure he gets it through. I think the Mentor is actually going to outclass a lot of Brennan's creatures, so maybe he's waiting for Brendan to tap out. Apparently not.
So
Brendan's got something here.
Brendan definitely was being very careful here. He could have deployed threats like Meddling Mage, but he was playing it safe because he knows that he just loses to 2 or 3 Monastery Mentor tokens, and he needs to keep up his ability to interact.
Yeah, it's not as simple as swordsing it, as we said. 1 Gush and a Force of Will on that swords or Mental Misstep. Chad's running 4 Mental Missteps. That is scary.
It's exactly what you want to be doing against blue meta. So let's see what, because this Mentor's still on the stack. So in response, I see, yep. So he's floating 1 mana, then casting Daze. If Monastery Mentor eats a Daze, this is a huge win for the Fish deck, because Fish is all about making these, they look like subpar cards on the surface, but you employ them at exactly the right time. Look at this. This so-called subpar card, like Daze, is eating 2 cards. It's eating a Jason Mind Sculptor and a Force of Will and 1 life. And all it was on the surface was pay 1 extra for your Monastery Mentor.
And how relevant was it that it's before, because the Mentor's on the stack, it's before the triggers. So being able to resolve the Mentor and then protect it with Force gets you those prowess triggers. He's making him burn those forces before he gets the trigger. Now it's resolved.
Yep.
And as we said, he did have the Gush and the Force. There you go. So
Chad knows here that even if his Mentor dies, even if he can't find a Mental Misstep off this, if he generates a token, and possibly a second token, even if he can, Fish will have a huge difficulty against a couple of 1/1 prowess that have just been generated out of nowhere, essentially. And there's the Mental Misstep. So this is the perfect, living the dream. This is where you get to counter their counter, then counter their removal spell, generate a bunch of tokens, and you just continue to beat down with them.
It's really funny, isn't it? All the spells we were just talking about, all those interactions, and here we go. The land that he lost off Gush doesn't really matter because Brendan went back with the Daze, and who cares? He just needs to ride this Mentor now, and
here comes
I reckon he'll be able to.
So the Spirit of the Labyrinth is a 3/1, and it denies your opponent any ability to draw additional cards other than their draw step. And you can see that Brendan would have wanted to deploy this or another creature, but he needed to keep that mana open. He was afraid of this eventuality. He needed to keep Swords of Plowshares open.
Spirit's really good. I've played against it a lot, and you think it's just there for the Treasure Cruise or the Jace triggers. It hits a lot of stuff. There's a huge amount of cantrips as well, like Preordains. The Spirit hits, and it's frustrating. It's really frustrating, and it's beating down at you the whole time. And a lot of these decks will keep a hand, which isn't great, but you got a few cantrips, so you reckon you'll be able to hit it, and they can hit Moxland Spirit. And suddenly, you're out.
That's what Fish wants to do. That's the whole principle behind Fish. Even though there are no actual merfolk in Fish anymore in Vintage.
Yeah, I was confused by that.
Yeah, Fish is.
I always thought Fish was merfolk.
Fish is a principle. Fish is a mindset.
We tested merfolk before this tournament, and I thought it might be all right.
Not anymore, I'm afraid.
Well, it wasn't all right.
And you can look at this. We've got someone with a Monastery Mentor active, and he's gone Treasure Cruise for 1 mana, and then in addition, Swords to Plowshares in your opponent's creature, and playing a Black Lotus. The number of prowess triggers and 1/1 additional monks that are being generated is quite literally impossible for Brendan's list to deal with on the next turn.
But Brendan had answers, He had the days, he had the swords.
He did.
He even had another sort of subpar creature, but it's just been absolutely dealt with by these mentor tokens.
That's the best and the worst of Fish. Fish is all about disruption. Fish is all about stopping your game plan. Just very, very slight advantages here and there. Slight, ability to interact here and there while speeding down with some little fishy creatures.
Yeah.
But
having click in hand.
It's painful, isn't it? So there's no balance. There's no way for him to get back into this game in the main deck.
13, is it? Swing, so
it's big.
There's 3 triggers that turn.
He will
Swords, Cruise, and Lotus.
Yeah, and so Chad doesn't. He needs a single spell to kill Brendan, or a counter spell creating a token during Brendan's turn, and then swing for exactly 8 without even a prowess trigger. So the writing's on the wall for Brendan. He's going to his sideboard, and from his sideboard, he's probably going to bring in, some of these cards that do interact, things like Mind Break Trap and the like. But at the end of the day, his sideboard really isn't built to combat these blue decks, because Fish is all about having a good blue matchup game 1 anyway. So it's very unlikely that much will change. However, for Chad, when he brings in his Supreme Verdict or Disenchant, because Disenchant can kill the Spirit of the Labyrinth, which is an enchantment creature. It's just an additional removal spell that doesn't get countered by Mental Misstep. He's probably assuming his opponent has Mental Misstep, but we know otherwise. Having the ability to reset the board is pretty useful. And it's not always that you end up having a Monastery Mentor every game.
No, I don't think you need to overthink the Supreme Verdict, because we just saw how quickly Mentor dominated that game. It doesn't need to be around for long, and I don't think there's really going to be a situation where you've got Mentor out, but he's being overpowered by Brennan's creatures, so you have to Supreme Verdict, and it feels bad because you're losing your Mentor. I don't think that's going to happen. I think once you've got the Mentor out, you're just going to be dominating the game, so I think it's definitely good to bring in the Verdict here. I mean, if he's not bringing Verdict here, what deck's he running it for? 17 creatures in that list.
People love to say that they bring it in for Eldrazi, but they don't. You can't pay 4 mana plus taxes.
And then they've Thought-Knot Seared it by the time it's relevant, and they've already got to bash him with a Reality Smasher. Eldrazi is tough to sideboard against.
You bring it in against Eldrazi, but you don't expect to cast it. You expect to pitch it to Force of Will.
That's true. It does pitch to Force of Will.
So the reason Supreme Verdict is in these lists these days is because it can't be countered by the Monastery Mentor player. It's really in there for the mirror match, and happens to do splash damage in some of these creature matchups when you get the ability to cast 4 mana plus taxes through.
Is he bringing in Disenchant, Fragmentize? I mean,
I would definitely bring in Disenchant in this matchup, because it kills your opponent's Spirit of the Labyrinth.
That's true. It does hit the Spirit. That's cute.
You haven't actually seen whether or not your opponent is running Null Rod, or whether they're running Sylvan Library. Like, there's definitely answers for it, but I probably wouldn't bring in Fragmentize, for example, because I'd assume my opponent has 4 Mental Misstep.
That's fair. Although, even just hitting a Mox and triggering your Mentor can be quite decent, and that's the thing with the Mentor, is you don't need to win the counter battles if the Mentor's out, because the trigger wins it for you anyway. There we go, Brennan with a hand. It looks pretty land heavy.
Yeah, he kept land heavy hand last time, and this hand has interaction, mana and draw spells.
Even
So
had a
that's
Wasteland
pretty
there,
much
so
perfect.
I
I'm
don't think it's going to be too relevant against Brennan's list, but sometimes Wasteland can win you a free game if your opponent keeps a land light hand. And Vintage never really saw too many Wastelands in these sorts of decks before.
No. It's a new edition, and that's because it's a new era of Vintage. I would expect that overall their 60s are pretty much the same as they were in Game 1. Maybe a card here or there, but at the end of the day, these two decks are more than happy to play another Game 1, either Explosive Mentor on one side or disruptive small creatures and fish on the other. And this is a perfect opening for a fish deck. Turn 1, Deathrite Shaman, ready to cast a 3 mana thing on the next turn, also having blue mana available to daze the first possible action that his opponent has, for example, a Swords of Plowshares on turn 1.
Chad didn't force it. I don't think that's terrible. From a legacy background, I usually like to force the turn 1 Shaman. This is a different format, though.
It's a different format because he has Black Lotus turn 1.
That's exactly
so
right.
This is absolutely the number one worst fear for Brendan Dobson. He was in a really good spot for the following turn, but his opponent doesn't even play a land and plays Lotus into Mentor.
Yeah, I would have been a bit
even
scared
afraid
of
Daze.
I think I would have dropped the land first
Yeah.
and played around the Daze. It didn't matter, and Chad had the Force of Will backup as well. So, this is rough for Brendan. He needs something really good off that turn 2.
Yeah, this is it's kind of make or break here that if Brendan doesn't answer this on turn 1, if he may not have the ability to do so, but he really needs to top deck it. He needs to have some kind of answer. He doesn't have balance. He doesn't have these kind of effects in his. And there's another trigger off a Mock Sapphire. So this is really running away now.
Oh.
And there's another trigger with the Ancestral Recall. So I think this is really Brendan's worst nightmare. This is exactly what he did not want to see.
Yeah, and it's easy to say now, but geez, Mental Misstep looks pretty good, doesn't it?
I would say that there is a world here in which Chad just goes, well, I just know that you don't have any way to deal with this, so whatever I do, I'm going to force a will it.
There's no Toxic Deluge. There's nothing that Brendan can top deck to cheat him out of this game.
Yeah, Chad doesn't know
Time
that.
Walk? No, not even Time Walk. It's just too much raw power that Mentor creates. I think this game's wrapped up.
This is where, when you have a Force of Will in hand, and you don't know if your opponent has a Daze or not, you can easily, not knowing your opponent's list is another question, but if you knew his list and you knew he has no way to get back in the game, you just Force of Will that Leovold, make a token, swing in the next turn, and continue swinging because a fish deck can't deal with 4 tokens.
To be fair to Chad, he doesn't know the list.
He doesn't know the list, exactly.
And I think it's totally reasonable to just force the spell that beats the Mentor. We know it doesn't exist because we're looking at Brennan's list, but yeah, perfectly good play from Chad to just be patient here, ride the Mentor. I think maybe with one other spell and a Time Walk, but
well, then you could just cast Snapcaster Mage Ancestral Recall.
That's an option.
Yeah. If I assume that this is, and then things
get tricky.
Yeah. So I think Brendan was thinking, hey, is Leovold like Spirit of the Labyrinth? Because that would have been pretty brutal if his opponent couldn't draw cards. But
yeah, Leovold says each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. So
Ancestral Recall will be cast.
Yeah.
Making a prowess trigger and not drawing any cards.
I have triggered Young Pyromancer and just threw a Chalice of the Void, and the spell gets countered, but you still get the triggers, and you can just bolt and brainstorm and A-call away, get 3 more 1/1 triggers, and the opponent laughs at you because they'll get countered, and then you swing lethal anyway because of those triggers. So, the triggers are not to be laughed at. I think that's the main thing we've learned from this game.
It definitely wasn't Chad's number one. I mean, he wanted to cast Ancestral Recall, but
it's a pretty good spell.
Yeah, drawing 3 cards for one is good, and doing it a second time is great. But this is just one of those situations where a brand new card in the format, and
you see misplays. I think that's one of something to be said about playing new cards. In any format, really.
Catch them.
You do. People not only don't know the power of the cards, they haven't tested the interaction, so they often misplay around it, and I think that's a really important factor that people just forget about it. People come into tournaments and they just assume they're not going to misplay because this time round I'm going to be extra vigilant, but it doesn't work like that. You will misplay, especially in a format as complicated as Vintage. You've got to expect it. I am going to misplay at some point. How do I minimize that,
This is interesting because Brendan has... And there we go. This is a lovely board from Brendan. Although his opponent has a bunch of monks, he has disruptive creatures, unfortunately with 1 toughness, but disruptive creatures catching his opponent in the draw step, and he's just going to try and tempo this game out. But the issue is, how many more monks can the Monastery Mentor generate because it's left unchecked?
No Snapcaster Mage from Brendan. Do you think Snapcaster Mage would be alright just for that ability to Time Walk, Snapcaster Mage, Time Walk? That must feel good. Time Walk, especially in a deck with that many creatures, though, so...
I think fundamentally, Snapcaster Mage in a fish deck is greedy, because it doesn't disrupt. It costs a lot of mana and doesn't disrupt. It flashes back spells, but usually you're flashing back a 1-mana spell, and the 1-mana spell is going to be a Flusterstorm or a Swords to Plowshares, but what you'd rather do with 3 mana is cast a Vendilion Click. Or Leovold, now that we have this new tool at our disposal.
Makes you want to play Leovold, even though Brendan lost that first game. Don't you want to play Leovold after watching
absolutely. Look at this. So the Force of Will finally comes out of the hand to counter the Vendilion Click and generate another token, but also creating prowess on the existing monks during his turn, because this was during his draw phase. So the danger here is, obviously Brendan already knows the danger is the fact that more tokens will keep coming, whereas every one of Brendan's creatures is a card. Every one of Chad's new creatures is not a card. It doesn't even exist. It's just being played for value off of the instants and sorceries you cast, and non-creature spells.
Yeah, and the blue-red Delver with the Pyromancer that I was talking about earlier is still a really good deck. I haven't seen it lately, but one thing to keep in mind that the Monastery hits is it's any non-creature spell. So, it triggers off those Moxes, and it triggers off that top, and unlike the Pyromancer, which has to be spells, and when you got all these rocks and sort of bits and bobs in Vintage, that the Mentor, it's very relevant, and also the prowess on the tokens is very relevant for that 1 extra power.
This is really the writing on the wall now, though, because the prowess triggers and the number of monks that have been generated, and even that Snapcaster Mage, the fish deck can't recover from this.
How do you erase it?
And there's something to be said nowadays with the current builds and white being dominant. There's something to be said to having a balance in every deck. Just in that sideboard, to deal with Eldrazi, to deal with excessive monk tokens, it's just a nice catch-all, and doesn't cost 4 mana.
That's true. That's true. What do you think Brendan's best matchup is for a fish deck like this with the Leovold?
His best matchups are blue decks, always blue decks, because that's what he's all about. And he's even got Meddling Mage and so on in there to be against the blue Storm decks, because he can name the win con. At the end of the day, this is actually the matchup that is pretty good for him, but for the fact that his opponent has 4 mentors and the ability to get them out very, very quickly and generate advantage off them, even if they're Swords to Plowshares.
Do you think he just got unlucky?
I think when your opponent draws Black Lotus, Monastery Mentor, Ancestral Recall, Snapcaster, you are going to have a hard time beating them, regardless of what you're playing and whether or not you're favoured.
That's reasonable.
This is Vintage, folks. When sometimes you think that you've got your worst matchup, and there's a disenchant, and this is the exact play we were talking about.
Yeah, it's very relevant.
The enchantment creature. Creating a token and making prowess and swinging probably for lethal here. I mean, Brendan can gain 2 life.
It's not going anywhere, is it, Sarv?
No. I'm surprised the Snapcaster Mage stays at home. I think it's all moot anyway. But that's that. This is one of those situations where if you chalked this one up and said which side do you want to be on, I would say I want to be on the fish side because I want to be on the play, number one, but I would like to be on the fish side because I want to disrupt. I want to go low to the ground and I want to keep my opponent off the ability to restabilize whilst attacking with my incrementally larger creatures. But at the end of the day, the Mentor deck this time around, the list was built to deal with a blue meta with a whole bunch of Preordains, whole bunch of Mental Missteps, and Snapcaster Mage, and this just worked out well.
Definitely so. Well, guys, thanks for watching, and we're Adelaide Eternal. That was Sarven, and I'm Beckett. So
go on to round 3 next.
Yeah, see you then, guys.